Okay, to fire up the G-scope, obviously you need to gain access to the building. It's usually the power is off, which it's very dark in here right now. Alright, so once you are up in the observatory and you have turned on the power of the circuit breakers, you need to turn on the main switch to the G-scope, which is located over here. There's a red and green button that you just need to push. And then again, that powers everything in on the G-scope. Just as all the equipment here, but you don't need to touch any of that. Once you've turned on the power, you have to remove the dust cover from the front of the telescope. You can do that by getting on the ladder and reaching it up there. We'll just remove the cover and then you just set it down in a safe place. After removing the cover, then you need to open up the observatory dome. Dome controls are here to actually operate the slit. Okay, so to operate the slit, there are two controls. There's one that opens up the main slit, goes up and down, and then there's a twist knob that turns to lower or bring back up the lower door. So I'll demonstrate. This button right here makes the slit go up. This one makes it go down. So I will do that. Alright, with the upper slit open, then you can lower the lower portion of the slit. It's not always necessary, but if you are going to be doing imaging at or near the horizon, it's probably a good idea to do so. So you just turn it the correct way. You can read the label there, and you'll see that the lower door does open. And you just release, and it'll stop moving. The last thing to do is, before you go downstairs and actually operate the telescope, you need to ensure that you unplug this cord. This is imperative. If you do not unplug it and then attempt to rotate the dome, it will rip it out of the socket here, which is not a good thing. So, best practice is to unplug it and then just wrap it around the controls here so that it does not dangle down and stays secure out of the way as the dome can rotate. Because the G-scope is controlled remotely from the observatory library, which is downstairs beneath us, we have cameras installed that both look at the telescope so we can monitor it during its operation, but we also have a camera installed on the telescope that looks straight down the path. This way we can watch the position of the slit while we're imaging and control the dome remotely from downstairs and know that we are pointing through the slit properly. Alright, here is the command center for G-scope. First thing you need to do is power up the computer by pushing this button and wait for the computer to boot up. It takes a little while. You can see that the camera that I talked about previously, this is the camera that's pointing at the telescope, so we can monitor its motion during slewing and understand where it's pointing, make sure nothing goes wrong. And then the camera that it's probably hard to make out on the image here, but it is pointing at the slit so that when the slit is in position and downstream of the telescope, you'll be able to see that you're looking through it. Alright, so once you have the observatory open up upstairs, you can come down to the computer, and this is the desktop that you'll see on the computer. We have some of the icons here that you're going to use to
control the telescope, we use Sky X or Sky 10, some people refer to it as. That is the software that controls all of the telescope, has planetarium software in it, and you'll see MicroTouch is the software that we use to control the focusing of the telescope, and that works in conjunction with Focus Max, that is an autofocuser.
So if you double click on the Sky 10 icon, it will open up the software. Sky 10 is the software that we use to control the telescope, control the camera, control the auto guiding. Everything is done within the software with the exception of focusing. In this case, the star map here in the field is rather zoomed in from the previous session, so if you just click in there and scroll out, it will then show you the full map of the sky. Once you're zoomed out, to navigate around the star field, you can either click and hold and drag the map, or you can use these hot buttons at the top. Will let you look in the various directions: north, east, south, and west.
First thing you want to do is connect to the telescope. So you go to Startup and connect the telescope, and you'll see that the ASCOM driver will load, and you can leave this window minimized if you want. In my case, I put it on the other monitor that you see over here, and I just put it there and locate it there so that I can use it and monitor it during the use. By the way, I am using dual screens here, so I will be switching back and forth to the different screens. We go back to the first screen, the primary screen, where the Sky software is. So we have now connected to the telescope and we have control of it. And if you look over here, you will see that it says it is unparked. If it were parked, which may happen, you just hit the expand button here and you literally hit the unpark button. Now this panel looks like there's a lot of different buttons and stuff that you have to touch. There is never going to be a time where you need to mess with any of these settings. The only other thing that you will do on this is either park or unpark, and that's the only function. So for the most part, you will keep this minimized. The next thing that you have to do is connect to the camera. So on the left hand side here, you have a couple different tabs. The Find tab, which is what you will use to find various objects. The Telescope tab, which is what we were just on when you are connecting to the telescope and controlling it. And then you have the camera and the auto guider. In this case, we're going to connect to the camera, and you go to the camera tab and you just hit connect. And provided that the camera is working properly and is ready, you will see that it goes to ready, and now you are all set and connected to both the telescope and the camera. So now that we're connected to both the telescope and the camera, the little yellow circle here represents where the telescope is pointing. And for this tutorial, I'm just going to slew the telescope to a nearby object. So we are currently pointing directly east, and I'll just pretend like I want to slew to Arcturus here. So you just click on Arcturus, and then you go to the telescope tab and you hit slew. The other way you can do is go to the Find tab. Once you've selected your object, you can center that object. It'll center in the screen, and then you can also hit the slew from here. So either method will work, whichever preference you want. Once you select Arcturus, under the Find tab, it'll give you all the information that you might want to know about your selected item. So I hit center and I'm ready to slew. And right now the telescope should be moving, and it is. So now you have your object pointed, the telescope is pointed at the object. And now you just have to make sure that the slit is also pointing in the same direction so that the telescope can actually see. To operate the dome, you use this black box that has momentary black and red buttons to go either left or right, depending on the direction you wish to travel. There's also two switches. The one on the left is the on-off switch for dome control, and the one on the right is on-off control for a light that is often helpful when transiting the telescope to your new object. It illuminates the telescope so that you can easily see how it is moving during its movement. With dome control enabled, I'll just hold down the red button here to get the dome to move in the direction that I need it to go. And while I'm holding that, if you observe the camera, you'll see that the dome indeed is moving. And you just hold it until you see the slit come into position. One quick comment about the slit position on the TV screen here. Because the telescope is not actually centered in the center of the dome, depending on which direction of the sky you're going to look at isn't necessarily going to be square to the slit. So this is just something that you're going to have to learn and figure out as you use the telescope where the right position on the television screen is so that the telescope is actually pointing through the slit properly. Once the slit is in position, you can go and turn off the light that illuminates the dome, and by doing so you'll see that the slit actually is much easier to see its position on the television screen. Okay, with the telescope pointing at our object and the slit moved into position, we get to take a test image now. So if you go to the camera tab here and go onto the focus tools tab, this is where you can take a test shot. We will set the duration of the test shot that we want to do here. So I'll just double click here and put in 10 seconds. And then just check the other parameters here. I'm going to do 1x1 binning. It is a light frame and I don't want any reduction. The rest of the parameters don't worry about. Most of the time we just leave those in the default position. So I hit this button over here. It says take photo. And when I press that, you'll see the status of the camera. Up there it says selecting filter. Now in this case I had the hydrogen alpha filter selected. If you wanted a different one, you just select it from the drop down list here, whichever filter you want. You can choose to move right away, or when you hit take photo, if it's not at that position, it will move. So here you can see it's exposing light for the 10 seconds that we asked it to, and it'll download the image and pop up here. Now because today that I'm doing this tutorial, it's a cloudy night, you're not going to see any images, but you can just imagine that there is a rich star field that we just took an image of. Now it's just a matter of personal preference on how you want to arrange all the windows that you have on your computer. My personal preference is to have the picture over on the right hand monitor, so I'll just locate it over here. And now we got to get ready to focus. So if you minimize SkyX software, you can see the icons in the back, and we have to open up MicroTouch. That'll open up and we'll hit connect here so it connects to the focuser. And again, I'll relocate this window over to the other monitor. And then we have to open up Focus Max, which is the software that actually helps us converge on a tight focus. I will locate those windows as well on the second monitor and show you here in a second the arrangement that I use. This is the logbook window that just tells you everything that's going on in the focusing software while it's working. So this is the arrangement here that I typically use for the various windows. Now we have the focuser set up. We do still need to connect it here, which I'll demonstrate here in a minute. To focus on a star, you actually have to move off your object that you're going to be imaging and find an appropriate magnitude star to focus on. Once you achieve that focus, then you would sloop back to your target and begin your imaging session. Focus Max is fairly picky on the magnitude star that you use to focus on depending upon the filter that you're using. So for the narrowband filters, you typically want to target a star that is a magnitude between 5 and 6. And for the luminance or RGB filters, a general rule of thumb is somewhere between 6 and 7 magnitude star. Once you have slewed to the appropriate magnitude star, you use the Focus Max software, which I'll demonstrate here, to achieve focus and then slew back to your target. The way the Focus Max software works is by working from the center of the image outward to locate your star that you would like to focus on. So you need to slew the telescope so that the star is fairly close to the center. I use that crosshairs up there in the upper right hand corner, turn those on and get my star close to the center of the image. And you also want to make sure that there aren't any other stars too close by that would confuse the software and make it very clear as to which star is the star that you wish to focus in on. So now that we have our focus star in the center of the window, we need to connect the Focus Max software to the camera. So you go through camera 1 and hit connect. And then you also need to connect Focus Max to the focuser software itself, which is MicroTouch. So focuser 1 and hit connect. And you'll know it's successfully connected when you see the two little blue lines below the words up there and that you have data there. The only last thing that you need to do, is this is fully automated, is you just hit focus and you'll see a lot of things going on in the logbook, and at the end it will tell you that you have achieved a successful focus. Alright, now that we've achieved focus, you'll want to slew back to your target. Don't forget to do that. And go over to the camera tab and click on the tab that says Take Photo, as opposed to Focus Tools where we were before. Now you need to set up the exposure duration that you want to set up, the binning selection that you want, call it a light frame if that's what it is, dark, bias, etc. And then we don't do any reduction, so we'll leave that alone. Before you take your image, you'll also want to make sure that you have the correct filter selected. You can select it by that drop down list and then hit Move Now. Alright, so you are all set up to take your image. We'll be setting our duration if you haven't already, so I'll just do 10 seconds here. And I'll press Take Photo and you'll see it is exposing light for the 10 seconds that we asked it to. And once it's done, it will automatically download the image and appear in the image window that we put over on the second monitor. And that's all you have to do to take your image. The one thing that has yet to be discussed is auto guiding. That will be better explained in person when you want to use the equipment, so please ask somebody who knows how to operate the equipment about the auto guiding when you use the equipment. Now that you have understood and learned how to image your object, the only thing that left is to shut down the computer. Alright, so if we go over to the other screen here and start with the Focus Touch focuser, you can disconnect it, and once it's disconnected you can just hit exit here. Then you go over to the Focus Max software itself and disconnect the focuser. You'll see the blue line go away, and then disconnect the camera as well. The blue line will go away, and then you can just exit out of that software as well. Click yes to exit. You can close out the imaging window by just clicking the red X. And before we're ready to disconnect the telescope, of course we have to park the telescope. Okay, we park the telescope using the ASCOM driver. You click the expand window here and you hit the park button. It'll ask you which position would you like to park. We always choose park 2, which is the position that we store the telescope in. You click OK and you'll start to see the telescope move back to its home position. Note the flashing parking, click this to abort window. If something were to go wrong, you can always click in that portion of the screen and the slewing of the telescope will stop.
Now that we've parked it, you can collapse that window and we're ready to disconnect the telescope. Back on the Sky software, under the shutdown drop-down menu, you'll see disconnect telescope. You select that and it'll go from parked to not connected, and the ASCOM driver software will close automatically. At this point, all you need to do is shut down Sky by clicking exit and shut down the computer, and then you can go upstairs and close down the observatory. To shut down the observatory, you first need to position the slit towards the western sky, which is the storage position. With the slit returned to the home position, now you're able to plug back in the power, which will turn on the lights of the observatory and allow you to control the slit. To close the slit, of course, you have to close the lower door first. Raise the lower door, and then you can use the push buttons to then close the slit. Once the slit is closed, you need to walk over to the power button and press the red button to turn off the power to the telescope. The next step is to put the dust cover back onto the telescope. Okay, so with G-Scope properly shut down, the only thing left to do now is kill all the circuit breakers to the building before you leave. Hopefully this video gave you a general overview of how to use the G-Scope. Of course, this is not a direct replacement for knowing how to use it fully. We encourage you to come out to the observatory and work with other members who are familiar with this equipment so that you can begin to use the equipment on your own comfortably.